and I am the Associate Provost for Faculty Development, also Distinguished Professor of History, Director of the Center for the Southwest, but most importantly today, Director of the UNM Pilot Project for the Career Diversity for History PhDs, funded by the American Historical Association and the Mellon Foundation. This is our kickoff conference, and we are thrilled to welcome you here from coast to coast. We're very honored this morning to have with us, to welcome all of you to the University of New Mexico, our Provost and Vice President for Academic Affairs, Chaouki Abdullah. Provost Abdullah.
Thank you, Virginia, and good morning. Can you hear me in the back? Everybody can hear me? Thank you. Thank you so much for both for the invitation and for asking the question, what use is history? So I'm an engineer by training, so hopefully you will indulge me as I try to describe to you what I think. So if by use you mean utility, then what use is a newborn child? And if by use you mean usefulness, then what use is a Georgia O'Keeffe painting? What use are the sage words of a grandmother or the kiss of a mother? At a time where utility and usefulness are the only measures of college education, what good indeed is history education? Have you noticed how the words good and use were interchanged in my last statement, my last sentence? I think that at the heart of the question is the idea that if something is of use, then it must be good, or that it's useful when it's good. I, as an engineer, personally believe that useful things are good to have. And I do believe that the study of history, or for that matter, any other study, is useful. In an article in a campus newspaper, Martin Luther King Jr. summed up the function of education very nicely. And his words apply to the study of history today. Quote, "It seems to me that education has a twofold function to perform in the life of man and its society. The one is utility and the other is culture. Education must enable a man to become more efficient." By the way, back then, men and women, right? "To achieve with increasing facility the legitimate goals of his life." Then he goes on to say, "The function of education, therefore, is to teach one to think intensively and to think critically. But education which stops with efficiency may prove the greatest menace to society. The most dangerous criminal may be the man gifted with reason, but with no morals." End quote. I understand that this event celebrates the many career of history alumni beyond the academy in order to increase career opportunities for history majors and PhDs in all sectors. In fact, I saw outside that some of the potential positions that historians went on to become are professors. Wow, that was a shock. The other one was an administrator. I'm assuming that's something also of a shock to some people. But there's a website you may wish to look at, to consider. It's by an assistant professor of history at Northeastern University. His name is Benjamin Schmidt. And it's benschmidt.org, where he actually shows what every major, what people who study in a particular major, when do they go on to practice. And if you click on history, you will see that history major go on to careers in law and education, to being managers, and this is true, including funeral directors. That's part of the, they had to call that one out. Chief executives, legislators, physicians, nurses, and horror of horrors, even engineers. Actually, some historians apparently are practicing engineers. But what is history? Is it, as Ambrose Bierce defined it, history, an account, mostly false, of events mostly unimportant, which are brought about by rulers, mostly knaves, and soldiers, mostly fools? Or is it, as Ian Morris said in a book that I really enjoyed, titled "Why the West Rules for Now," where he argued that the past has strong patterns, and with the right tools, historians can see what they are and even explain them. And he then describes 3 such tools: biology, sociology, and geography, to describe our history. My favorite, however, is the description in The Methods and Skills of History by Fourier and Salavoris, where they said, "History is society's collective memory. Without that collective memory," they continue, "society would be as rootless and adrift as an individual with amnesia." They also state that history can help us develop tolerance and open-mindedness, and perhaps rid ourselves of some of our inherent cultural provincialism. They go on to note that historical knowledge is extremely valuable in the pursuit of other disciplines, literature, art, religion, political science, sociology, and economics. And thus history becomes a tool to study and to practice many of these other fields. Now, I told you I'm an engineer. My specific specialty is something called system theory. And there's there a concept of the state of the system. And what it means really is it's the exact, just enough, no more and no less, amount of knowledge at any specific time so that the future may be predicted from that knowledge. So the state of the system at any one instant encapsulates all of history, all of its history prior to that instant. That's why the President of the United States delivered the State of the Union address. And that's why we can predict the movement of planets without needing to rewind to the Big Bang. I often wish that history, or for that matter, any of the liberal arts fields are as neat as systems engineering. But I do believe that the concept of a state can help us answer the question that this meeting poses. So what use is history, you ask? Well, history is of no use to those who do not care about the future. To everyone else, stick around for the next couple of days and watch history unfold. Thank you.
Okay, who wants to follow that? I think I know. Thank you so much. Wow. I'd like now, since I don't want to have to follow that, to introduce Jim Grossman, who is Executive Director of the American Historical Association. And I want to say first, thank you so much to Jim for bringing UNM into this project alongside our partner pilot institutions. I like to call them our peer institutions: Columbia University, the University of Chicago, and the UCLA. We're really proud to be a part of this visionary initiative, and Jim will give us the big picture of the project and his vision of what we're hoping to achieve over the 3 years of funding from Mellon and far beyond into sustaining new possibilities for history and historians. So please welcome Jim Grossman.
Thank you, Ginge. Appreciate it. And thank you, Provost Abdullah. It is going to be hard to follow that. And in part, you'll see in a second that I'm going to follow it by repeating it. And I especially appreciate your introduction. I was just about to tweet, and I didn't have time to do it, that it's wonderful to see one more example of how people in STEM disciplines can understand and appreciate what we do. My daughter, by the way, is a PhD student at Georgia Tech, so I know it's because you were trained correctly. This is all about where one is taught. I want to thank the Provost, Gingy. I want to thank also Melissa Bakavoy, the director of the History Department here, for being willing to take this on. It's a lot of work for the department and for a lot of people in the department, and some of my old friends who are here. So, what I want, and the reason I'm going to, and I also want to second Provost Abdullah's reference to Ben Schmidt's website. How many of you have seen any of Ben Schmidt's work on the web? Okay, so you did not know. How many of you saw the State of the Union speech? If you had gone to Ben Schmidt's website, he's nodding. If you'd gone to Ben Schmidt's website, here again, how historians can do useful things that other people can appreciate, what you would have seen was, as the president was speaking, Ben had come up with an algorithm that enabled him to instantly show you how many times any given word had been used in a State of the Union speech before. So, for example, when Obama referred to transgendered, it became immediately obvious to anybody who went to Ben Schmidt's website, as if you wouldn't guess this anyway, that nobody had ever used this in a State of the Union before. But it was actually a very interesting little thing that he put together. Anyway, I refer to Ben as the Nate Silver of the Academy or the humanities, because a lot of what he does focuses broadly on the humanities. It's worth taking a look at what he does, and those of you who are on Twitter actually following him, this is worth it. So the way I was going to start, and this is why I was struck by Provost Abdullah's presentation, you were talking about things that undergraduate history majors do. I'm going to follow that with a list of history PhDs who, by most definitions of history PhD programs, are failures, or at least not successful. I will not mention their names, just their titles. Global Head of Institutional Business for Fidelity Worldwide Investment. That's someone who's also written 2 books. Founder, Talking Points Memo. Head of Human Resources, Agios Pharmaceuticals. Political Scientist, Rand Corporation. Employment Manager, McKinsey & Company. Nurse, California Medical Center. Senior Manager of Business Design for a company called Citrix. Head of Marketing and Communication for a company called Sotheby's that some of you have heard of. Director of Communications, City University of New York. Institutional Public Service Representative for Dish Network. Pastor. Executive Director, International Center for Urban Growth. Manager, Old Fort Mason. Commandant of Cadets, Culver Military Academy. Federal agent, U.S. government, that's how it's listed. I'm not sure what it is. I didn't realize that. I'm trying to figure it out. Research Center Director, Chemical Heritage Foundation. Chief of Staff to the Speaker of the House of Representatives. Speaker of the House of Representatives. All of those people, actually except the last, because the last one did have a tenure track job before he became Speaker of the House of Representatives. All of those were people who did not find tenure track jobs or did not seek tenure track jobs in the end. All of them. So by the definitions that many universities attach, often through algorithms that determine resources that flow to departments based on, quote, placement rates, which we can get to later, all of these people are failures. Because all of them are history PhDs from a wide variety of universities around the country. And one of the things that you're going to encounter in the next 2 days at this conference are a bunch more people who are doing a bunch more different things. I don't think I included in this list anybody who's on this program quite purposefully. So you'll get a lot more of this kind of variety, but I think this gives you a sense, first of all, of the many, many things that people have done with history PhDs. I think for many people, when I run through this list, the immediate answer is, okay, so what? What did getting a PhD in history mean for these people as they moved on to these occupations? Retrospectively, given where they are now, why did they bother? And that's also what you're going to hear in the next few days. People talk about why it does matter to have a history PhD when you're doing these other kinds of work that are not the quote normal professorship path. And that's one of the things that we want to do with this initiative, is we want to normalize these paths. These are all people, I would argue, who are exceptional. And I would argue that most of the people on this program are exceptional. And the reason I say that is because they had to figure it out. On the whole, except for public history programs pulling people into public history work, which is actually a much smaller sector than most people think, people who would follow these kinds of career paths really had to do it themselves. And what we want to do is we want to normalize this. We want to restructure or even just slightly change history PhD programs so that you don't have to, in essence, figure this out by yourself. Now, we've already, for some of you who have not seen any of this, if you go to VHA's news magazine, Perspectives, there are copies in the other room, and it's also online. We have ungated it, so you no longer have to be a member to read Perspectives, but of course you should. Because I will remind you, if we have no members, we don't have a news magazine, and we don't have the American Historical Review. I'm not here, this initiative isn't here, so I would suggest very strongly that all of you join. Those of you who are graduate students, it costs almost nothing. It's $40, and you get $19 of that back if you go on the academic job market. We didn't vote. I won't go into it all. But we should all be members. But if you go to the Career Paths series that's in Perspectives, what you'll see is, you'll see a lot of these people actually that I've just mentioned. What you'll see is people talking about how they got to where they were, what kind of path they took. We have a comparable series on our website called What I Do, which is actually very different. It's complementary. I went to a conference last year at Columbia, which was very similar to this one, and that they're going to be repeating again next week. And what became clear was that as all these people were talking about these different career paths and how history PhDs could do all these different things, it actually became clear that the graduate students who were there were fascinated by these careers, but even at the end of the conference actually had no idea what these people actually do between 9 o'clock in the morning and 5 o'clock in the afternoon, or 6 or 7 or 8. And so we have on our website 5-minute pieces, 5-minute videos called What I Do, where you can just see what different historians do in many, many different kinds of jobs. I don't think we have anybody here in that series. We may soon. So there are many different ways of beginning to explore this. To go about this, the first thing we realized we had to do was to dispel some myths. And it's taken a lot of time, and we're still in the process of it. Myth number 1, the humanities PhD, and by extension the history PhD, prepares its recipients to do only one thing. Second, not doing this one thing means that you have failed, which I've already talked about. But it also gets us to cultural change, which is very difficult. If there's anything that we as historians understand better than anybody else, it's change. It's how change happens. All chemists understand how change happens, but that's a different thing. And physicists as well. But we understand how change happens. And one of the things that we know is that there's a relationship not only between structure and change, but culture. And culture itself is extremely hard to change. We especially know that in the academy. Academics are humanists especially, are very strange people. We all know that there's a leftward skew in the academy, especially in the humanities. But actually, in the academy, Provost is nodding his head because he deals with the humanists in the academy are about the most conservative people you will ever come across. Change is really hard. Those old boring jokes. How many professors does it take to change a light bulb? Change. So this is hard. So that's part of it. Is that we have to change culture. We have to think about where this comes from. This culture of failure. Myth number 3: preparing graduate students to do other things distracts from preparation to be a professor. That's probably the biggest one. And there are people who are either in this room or who will be in this room at some point during the day, or who are at least on this campus, as well as every other campus we're working, and every other campus I visit, who have said, no, we cannot do this because it's going to distract students from that straight line to the PhD and the academic job. And this is a distraction, all these other things that you want them to do. I'll get to this in a few moments as well, but this is a myth, and it's a myth that we have to dispel. And then finally, the 4th is the jobs crisis is new. And I'm going to start with number 4. I got my PhD in 1982. I started graduate school in 1974. When I decided to go to graduate school, 2 of my undergraduate professors, one of them actually literally dragged me into his office, sat me down, he went into his office, sat me down in a chair, and said, do you know what you're doing? This is not new. This job crisis in the humanities, in history, but also other humanities disciplines, has really existed since the mid-70s. There's been some ebbing and flowing, but the the academic job market has been absolutely awful, pretty much for the last 40 years. The only change, really, is that we now know the change is permanent, that the crisis is permanent. In the 1970s, 1980s, there was always a sense, okay, it's going to get better. Because everybody knew that there was this cohort hired in the 1950s and 60s when public universities expanded. Many of those cohort is in this room. And we all knew that that cohort was going to retire someday. And when that cohort retired, all those people hired in the 50s and 60s, there'd be lots of jobs. And in fact, Bill Bowen, who at the time was president of the Mellon Foundation, wrote a famous piece in the, I think it was the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s, saying, we've got to increase the number of PhDs because there's going to be all these openings coming up. All these people are going to retire. And unfortunately, Bowen had never met Senator Pepper. And the Pepper Amendment, which was passed sometime, I believe, in the 90s, basically ever since then, nobody has to retire. So retirements never happen. The big number of retirements. People are teaching well into their 70s, 80s. Look, it's a good gig, and this is not something people retire from very often. So it's not new. What's new is now we realize that this is permanent, that the numbers that we have are the numbers that we will have. The other big change is adjunctification. I'm not going to open that can of worms this morning. It's a different conversation. But that also has an impact on realizing that this is not going to change. So very quickly, because I don't want to take too much time. Myth number one, the value of a PhD. If you think about what it is you can do once you've had a PhD in history, what are the skills that you have? Think about a messy closet. What you learn how to do is to take a closet that's filled with a bunch of stuff, either unorganized stuff or disorganized stuff. Could be either one. And what a history PhD basically teaches you how to do over a period of 6 or 7 years is to make sense of that stuff, to actually put it in order, which other disciplines do as well. But the difference is that for us, it also teaches you how to put it in an order that tells a story, and how to put it in some kind of order that tells a story and has an argument. And if we take it one step further, the step that's not taken often enough, you put it in an order that tells a story, that has an argument, that actually is important to something that you can explain in less than a minute. And we'll get to the explaining in less than a minute later. Experienced teachers, most history PhDs have taught. Experienced teachers, if they're good teachers and experienced teachers, and if they've learned how to teach, that's a big if, are good listeners. You cannot be a good teacher once you move out of the lecture hall, unless you're a good listener. And actually, I would argue even a good lecturer is a good listener. Anybody who's learned how to lecture has learned that you have to look across the room as you're lecturing and figure out if you're losing people. And if you're losing people, you've got to stop, step back. Someone's nodding in your head, that's right. You've got to stop, step back, and say, what am I doing here? So it's a different kind of listening. And experienced teachers are also good leaders. That's, after all, what a good seminar is basically you're convening a meeting, in essence, and you're making it work. There's something that we were never taught in graduate school about. We weren't taught much about teaching, but even now, one of the little aphorisms that someone gave me about leading a meeting, which would be a great aphorism for teaching, which is the point at which you look around the room and you say, okay, everything's been said, but not everybody has had a chance to say it. And see if that allows you to move on. And finally, the question I have for people who question the value of a PhD, and I think to some extent this goes back to something that Provost said. What is wrong with someone pursuing knowledge to the highest degree possible? Just for the sake of doing it, and for the sake of how that builds your mind, your mental capacities, your knowledge of people, your knowledge of culture. Is it possible that in the same way we say a 4-year liberal arts education is a good thing for its own sake, is it possible that, 6, 7 more years is also can be a good thing for its own sake? A history PhD who's been involved with this project, who's now a business consultant, was asked in one of our meetings, okay, so would you do it again? What you're doing in business consulting really has very little to do with the topic of your dissertation. His answer was, well, I'm the person I am because I did that. And the person I am is the person who has this job. And the person I am is the person who goes home every day from this job, who has other interests, who does other things, and that's who I am. And it was worth those 6 years. And I think we have to ask that question as well. Now I want to go back to myth number 3. Preparing you to do this distracts you from the real preparation to be a professor. And this, in some ways, is the most important thing that this project is trying to do. Actually, I'm going to back off that. There are 2 things here. The other important thing that we're trying to do, by the way, is we're also trying to collect data. and we're asking every department to help us do this. We actually already know the names and dissertation topics of every history PhD since time immemorial. And we took those data, and we did a study, 1998 to 2009. There are 11,000 history PhDs, and we did a sample of 2,500, random sample. And I'm just curious, some of you already know the answer to this because either you've heard me do this pitch before or you've seen our stuff. But anyone want to guess how many of those 2,500 people are in tenure track positions?
800.
A third. No, it's actually 51%. And of that 51%, 1/3 of those are at research universities. So if you assume that really what you do in a PhD program is pretty much learn how to live in a research university, which is pretty much what you do, that means 1 out of 6 people are being prepared for what they're going to do, which is, I want to throw that out before we get to the distracting from what you're really going to do. The notion that you will spend your life giving undergraduate lectures, teaching graduate students, doing research, which is what graduate school prepares you to do, that's 1 out of 6, which is the same number of, the same proportion who will be non-tenure track faculty. So 51% tenure track faculty, about 16, 17, 18% non-tenure track faculty, many of them part-time. Arguably, those are people who should be able to do something else because that's not really, being a professor is a good gig, being a part-time professor generally is not. 25% are working outside of professoring. And of that 25%, only 1/8 are public historians. That's one of sort of the myth of what history PhDs can also do. There are not gazillions of jobs out there in museums and all that, believe me. And there are many people with museum degrees actually who take some of these jobs. So it's 25% are basically not professors. So again, going back to the myth, one of the myths we have to dispel is that we're not preparing people already, or people already aren't taking their PhDs elsewhere. We're just not preparing them very well for it. So one of the things we want to do is we want to normalize that 25%, and we want to take that 18% who are doing non-tenure track. We have a different project where we want to try to figure out exactly who those people are and what they're doing. But the proportion of those people who are not living lives that they really want to live in terms of salary, workload, whatever, we want to prepare them to be doing other things. So, what do we have to do to prepare these people to do this? So we did focus groups with history PhDs working outside of the academy, especially people who finished recently, but also some more senior people who do hiring. And we did some interviews with people in literary studies and other humanities degrees, but mostly history. And we asked them, what is it that you wish you had done in graduate school that would have given you a clearer path to the work that you're doing now, would have enabled you to do what you're doing now, but perhaps be a little higher up, move a little faster in your career? And if you hire people, what is it that you look for in those that you know history PhDs don't have? And when we looked at it all, and this is one of the things historians are good at, we're good at taking lots and lots of different things and synthesizing it into categories. It's what we do. We were able to fit this pretty much into 4 categories. And the first one was communication. We teach our students to write books, which is good. We teach our students to write articles. We teach our students to write book reviews. They see us writing textbooks, and so they realize that maybe they should learn that because it looks like we make lots of money when we write textbooks. We don't, and we teach them how to write lectures, if we're preparing them well for being one of these tenure track professors at a research university. We don't teach them how to write one-page memos. We don't teach them how to use visualizations when they're speaking. You'll notice I'm standing here speaking, and I have data, and I have nothing up there on the screen behind me. This is do as I say, not as I do. We don't teach them how to speak to broad audiences. We don't teach them how to write op-ed pieces. And that's right now thrown out as something everybody should be doing, but it is the sort of thing that makes people realize that we're useful. The more we write in places and people see such and such is a historian. I would like every history department in the United States at this point, because I assume just about every history department in the United States has a 20th century American historian. I would like to see emanating from every history department in the United States a review or commentary on the film Selma in the local newspaper, so that people in every community where there's a college can see that the historian at the nearby college actually has something interesting to say about something that they have found interesting. But we don't teach our students how to do this. So there's all sorts of forms of communication that we don't teach our students how to do. And what's interesting is that all of those forms of communication make you a better professor. Ari is nodding his head here. We all know that universities actually want you. They have communications offices that send the press to you. And they want you to be able to speak to the press. They want you to be able to do an interview. Even though they then tell you it doesn't count. But they still want you to do it. And most professors actually do want to do this, but we don't teach our students how to do it. Anybody who has done any serious administrative work knows that if you're going to do administrative work, you've got to write memos. And those 5/6 of people who get tenure-track jobs not in Research 1 universities, well, I can tell you they're going to be doing committee work in year 2 or year 3, especially if they're at liberal arts colleges, which means you have to learn to write in 1 page if you want to accomplish anything at all. And this is not, again, this is not something just like presentation skills make you a better teacher. These kinds of skills are not hard to teach. Every time we assign a 40-page research paper, we can say to students, and I want a 1-page version. And I want a 1-page version with bullet points. This gives students practice doing it. At one of the other universities that's participating in our project, a really interesting idea came up, which is what would happen if every student doing a research paper had to do one of these 1-page memos, and the department compiled the 1-page memos and used that as a way to actually figure out the range of research that graduate students were doing in that university. How would that become actually a resource for graduate education that then actually could also become a resource from year to year? These 1-page, and they don't necessarily have to be summaries. If you think about it, they could be summaries, they could be sort of position papers, they could be all kinds of different things. So this is not a distraction. It makes you a better professor. Second, and this is the one that scares people more. The first one, actually, most people nod their head and say, oh yeah, we should be doing that. Quantitative literacy. I spoke at the MLA last month, and that really scares them at the MLA. But this is something that just about everybody working outside of the professoriate has said, this is what I didn't have. And when I say quantitative literacy, I have a really low bar here. So, for example, when you read all of the stuff in the press about student debt, in other words, something that matters to the world in which we live, what you'll see is a reference to the average student debt. How many of you, when you read that reference to the average student debt, yeah, someone's nodding her head, she knows what I'm going to say, ask whether this is a mean or a median. If you don't ask that question, you do not understand the problem. If you don't ask that question, you can't even talk about the problem of student debt if you don't know whether that figure is a mean or median. Never mind asking the second question, which is, does that include people with no debt at all? So when I say quantitative literacy, it's the ability in some ways not just to do it, but even just to read it. The ability to read a budget and then to create a very simple one. This is not, believe me, this is not rocket science. The director of the Humanities Indicators Project, which is a massive quantitative, basically they keep the data on what we do, was having trouble finding someone to fill a position. And I said, well, why is it so hard? All of our people don't have jobs. And his answer was that they couldn't find anybody who was quantitatively literate. And I said, well, what do you need? Does anybody here teach in the education department? Okay. And his answer to me was, not much. Basically a stats course in an education department. And what he said, the bar was very low. This is not very hard to get. And this, again, this makes you a better professor. Anybody here who's ever done any administration does this. And again, we go back to the likelihood of most of our students doing administrative work at some time in their career, even if they become tenure-track professors. Because if you're not at a Research One university, you're going to have to do it. That's just the way it works in most places that are smaller. And even at a Research One university, I was at an institution that will remain unnamed, a high-prestige major research university, not one of our participants, who, when I was talking about this, said to me, yeah, this was the director of graduate studies, said, yeah, in my second year as DGS, I realized that if I could understand the budget, I could accomplish a lot more. Yeah. So these are things, and I don't think I need to tell most people in this room, quite frankly, that a lot of the scholarship that we do has suffered over the last generation from quantitative illiteracy. For a lot of our students, the work would be a lot better if people could use numbers even just a little bit. And to use an even better example, how many of you remember the Michael Belisle affair, the guns, right? Yes. How did he get caught out in terms of the article in the Journal of American History? It was a single table. Journal of American History sent that article to 7 readers. Not a single one of those readers realized that that table had a serious problem. Anybody reasonably quantitatively literate would have recognized that that table had a serious problem. And so our discipline, in fact, suffers from this. Okay, third, and I want to run faster here, collaborations. One of the things that we do not help our students learn is how to work collaboratively. In other disciplines, this happens all the time. We've lost our engineer at the table, but an engineering graduate student from day one participates in collaborative work. Why does this matter? It matters because outside of the professoriate, just about everybody now will collaborate, for better or for worse. It's not the wonderful experience that everybody thinks it is. It's a certain romanticization of collaboration. Talk to your provost's engineering colleagues, and they will tell you about graduate students fighting over whose name is second or third on a paper. It's not that easy, or people who protect their data, but it's something students have to learn. And there are ways, there are ways in which we could do this that are not going to distract students. In fact, it's going to enhance the quality of their work. And collaborative work makes you a broader thinker. I don't need to go into this. I mean, I think most of you know this. We can integrate this into our graduate curriculum in ways that will enhance their ability to be historians, as well as to do other things. The final thing is something that we came to call intellectual self-confidence, which may seem to you to be a rather odd thing that we're saying history PhDs need. But if you think about it, what happens is we get, in our graduate programs, people who think they're pretty smart. I mean, after all, that's why they're going to be a student for 6 or 7 more years. If they didn't think they were pretty smart, they really wouldn't sign up to be a student for 6 or 7 more years unless they're really genius. So what happens? What we do, and this is for very good reason, I'm not critical of this, what we say to them is, you know, keep your mouth shut unless you know what you're talking about. Unless you have control over the sources, unless you know the secondary research, step back. Defer to people who actually know what they're talking about. Do the work. Read the sources. Know the primary sources in your field before you write. Know the secondary landscape. And this is what we should be doing. This is in some ways the difference, I would argue, between a PhD and a BA and maybe even an MA, is that kind of depth that you have, and understanding that you have to have that depth to write about something intelligent. On the other hand, we also kind of beat out of them the notion that you're a really smart person, you know how to do research, you know how to figure things out, and there are times where it's okay, and in fact good, to speak reasonably knowledgeably about things you don't know a lot about. After all, people teach survey courses, where they give lectures on things they've never done research. We do this all the time, especially now if you're not at a Research One. Again, if you're not at a Research One university, you're going to go in there and you are going to give lectures on things that you have never heard of until last week. You're an American historian, and I'm going to give a specific example here of someone I know. You're an Asianist. You're an Asian historian, and you get a job at I won't name the university, a non-research university, a perfectly reasonable job. public university, and you find out your second year after you're there that, no, we didn't hire you to teach Western Civ, but you need to teach Western Civ. You may be a Japanese, but we need you to teach Western Civ. You're going to teach Western Civ. And so this is a talent that you have to be a good historian, to be a historian in many jobs. This is the sort of thing that you need to have outside the academy. You need to be able to sit in a meeting. There's 7 people around the table, and someone says, someone's got to figure something out by Friday. We need to do this, and someone's got to figure this out by Friday. You need to be someone who's going to raise your hand and say, give me 48 hours, I'll figure it out. And that's one of the things that a history PhD, in fact, teaches you to do. It teaches you how to find information quickly, how to read sources critically, how to put things together, how to tell a story, how to make an argument, and how to do it quickly, in part because you do it when you're teaching. Anybody who's in this room who does, for example, American cultural history and has been if you're a graduate student, has been a teaching assistant in the second half of the American History Survey and has had to explain greenbacks and free silver, knows that you've got to be able in 2 hours to figure out something that you know nothing about and be able to explain it. So this is something that in fact our students do have, but we kind of beat out of them the idea that this is a good thing and that this is something to do. You see this especially, I've seen especially in working with media, where I'll get a call, when I was in Chicago this happened a lot, I'll get a call from a film producer saying, I need someone to talk about X. And I'll name somebody, and they'll say, nah, try her, she just doesn't do TV. And I'll say, okay, here's 2 other people. They'll call those 2 other people, and they'll call me back and say, I need someone else because those 2 other people say they haven't written a book on it.
Yeah.
If you've taught it, you can do it on TV. But we don't know that. We think that we can't talk about something unless we've written the book on it. And again, to succeed beyond the professoriate, students need to have this kind of stuff confidence. So what we're really talking about here is not so much redirecting our graduate program, distracting our students. What we're talking about is history as a discipline flexing its muscles in society. Saying to everybody else, there's a lot that we can do, there's a lot that we can contribute. You need us. You need us if you're going to understand anything at all. My argument is that everything has a history, and that therefore there's absolutely nothing that does not benefit from historical thinking. How many of you have read Freakonomics? What would happen if you did that book as a historian? Whatever one may think of how horrific some of the conclusions, what they've demonstrated, whether you agree or disagree with some of their conclusions, what they've demonstrated is you can take any problem and you look at it completely differently. You turn a kaleidoscope if you think like an economist. That's the successful thing that they have done in that book. We should be doing the same thing. And we should be doing that by getting people, getting historians into all sorts of different jobs that you're going to be hearing about over the next 2 days. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to talk really fast, and because we are a little bit behind ourselves already, and I think what we can do is we can, shrink the breaks and go a little into lunch to make sure that you get to hear all the amazing people. We do realize we have a special role to play here at UNM in this pilot project because we're both a very high research university and a Hispanic serving institution, and we are famous in some ways for, as a history department, for punching above our weight. And by that I mean, we have been, despite the dire news in inside higher education that elite institutions hire from elite institutions, we have always been really good at placing our students both inside and outside of the professoriate, and I think this is for a couple of reasons. We do not have the enormous endowments of our fellow pilot institutions. We don't have the elite ranking. We don't have any of that. What we have is an incredible professoriate here, and we have a student body and a culture in our student body and our alumni culture of an incredible collegiality and esprit de corps and a hand up. So we have brought you all back here. You are all members of, or many of you, I shouldn't say all of you. We welcome those of you who are not to what is universally known as the UNM Mafia. And we would love to have you join us in this kind of collegial enterprise. And that will go for the format of the conference here as well. So this is not going to be your father's academic conference. We have one real talk, and we're very excited about our keynote lecture by Dr. Robert Donia, who is a distinguished scholar of Slavic history and retired vice president of Merrill Lynch. So, you know, that kind of magic combination that Jim talked about earlier, we've got it in the house today. We're very excited about that. But other than this keynote, what we see is our sessions will be free-flowing conversations. They feature presenters from a wide array of fields. Most of them are UNM alumni. We're very excited about that. We've asked members of our history department to facilitate those conversations. We know everybody in the room has a lot to contribute, so we're building in lots and lots of time for audience conversation about this. So our presenters are not going to go on and on and on as we academics are wont to do. These are conversations among them, and the audience will be involved. I want to take just a moment more to thank everybody at UNM who's made this conference possible, and obviously to thank the folks at the AHA and the Mellon Foundation. I'll start with our department chair, Melissa Bakaboy, who is problem solver in chief, inspiring leader, and most important, our financial agent for the award, which any of you who have dealt with, you know, pre-award, post-award, and everything in between, is some puzzle solving that requires a truly nimble mind. So thank you, Melissa, for your I would like to thank the incredible History Department Faculty Advisory Committee on this project, and I would like you just to stand and let us give you a round of applause. Many of them are not here. It's a very deep bench there teaching. And they have to do that. And they have guided our vision and activities, and they will do so going forward. We want to thank the Dean of Arts and Sciences, Mark Pisani, who has supported the project, Yolanda Martinez, and the unbelievable History Department staff, who, after all, are the reason that a UNM Mafia can even exist. Yolanda and Dana and Barbara and Hazel and Amanda have been amazing. Let's give them a round of applause. So they're not here. We have an ingenious colleague, Dr. Fred Gibbs, who is responsible for the logo on the bags and is at work on lots of other things. Fred does digital humanities. He would be here, but he is at home with somebody who's only, I think, 5 days old. So Fred is not here today, and along with Shannon Withicombe, who is his wife and who is with that 5-day-old Miles as well. And I also want to recognize Eric Pacer, who is our AHA Mellon postdoctoral fellow. Eric, we want to thank you for doing your incredible job of coordinating our internship program, reaching out to partners across the university and across New Mexico, working with career services, teaching with me, everything you've done. Unbelievable. Eric, please take it back. Now, if I were going to give Eric that intellectual self-confidence, I'm like, Eric, you got to stand up and really take that. So that's my next project. So I want to just say we owe our greatest debt of gratitude to Jen McPherson, who is ABD in history, an award-winning historian, young scholar, and graduate coordinator of our AHA Mellon pilot program. Everybody who's ever worked with Jen can testify that not only is her scholarship amazing, but she's also an organizational genius and a natural leader. She gets more done in a day than anybody else I know does in a month. She is able to see the long-term picture and get all the details right, from being the communication nerve center to handling scheduling, programs, travels, meals, the fabulous swag bags, and every diva in the room. So, thank you, Jen.